What's up, everyone? I'm Chris.
I'm
This
Ryan.
is Ryan. Thanks for having us. Hopefully the title makes sense to you. Stop running in circles and ship work that matters. We're going to share some methods that we've uncovered about how to get product and engineering to really collaborate well together and to basically with the end result of shipping great products. I want to be clear going into this. This is not 6 tips to run a great product team. This is us trying to be as raw and transparent as we possibly can during the time that you've given to us here. This is us basically saying, we have been in the trenches getting our asses kicked, and we're here to share some notes about what we've discovered.
Totally.
And hopefully share some things that are helpful to you. Like I said, I'm Chris Spiek. I started my career in my 20s as a software developer, building software products. Had some successes, had some failures, a lot more failures than successes, I guess, as is usually the case. But I figured out within a couple of years after I started building software that if I was going to have a fulfilling career as a software developer, somebody that builds software products, I was going to have to figure out what made some products a wild success and other products a miserable failure. So essentially, I went on a journey a couple years into being a software developer to figure out consumer behavior. What causes a consumer to buy one product and not buy another product? And I started out by just devouring everything I could. I learned about personas and need state analysis and laddering and just everything you can read up on the subject. All great material, but all felt a little bit too squishy for me in terms of how I could use it to build something, right? I was looking for concreteness. So as I was studying and networking and searching, I ended up meeting 2 gentlemen who ultimately would change the trajectory of my life and my career. The first one was Bob Mesta, who I founded the Rewired group with in 2006, and the other was Clayton Christensen. Yesterday during the keynote, you heard Yo from Google talk about disruption, and I love how passionately she talked about disruption theory. Clay was the creator of disruption theory, and he wrote a book about it called The Innovator's Dilemma. And in The Innovator's Dilemma, out of that whole wonderful book, there is a teeny tiny footnote on one of the pages that talks about jobs to be done. And essentially, Bob and Clay and I got together and spent the next decade turning jobs to be done from that little footnote in The Innovator's Dilemma into a framework that product teams can use to uncover demand and build great products that people want to buy. During that 10 years, I had the wonderful opportunity to work on products in absolutely every industry, every major industry. So CPG, home cleaning goods, to food products, Wrigley gum, things like that, to energy, education, basically you name it, I've been there. This is a tech conference, and my passion is software. So when I make the slide, I talk about the cool companies. Spent a couple years at Facebook, worked with the guys at Intercom and Dropbox, and of course, my dear friend Ryan from Basecamp helped product strategy there as well. After about 10 years, the thing happened to me that has probably happened to a lot of you. Got married. Wife and I had our first child. She said, I know you love jumping on the plane and flying around and doing all this work, but can you please just stop? And so I joined Auth0, stood up the product team there, ran product there for a couple of years, and I'm currently Chief Product Officer at Autobooks, who I'm hoping a lot of you are familiar with, and we'll get into Autobooks in a second here.
Yep. And I'm Ryan Singer. I was at Basecamp 37 Signals for about 17 years. Started on the team of 3 that did the V1. Web 2.0 was a new thing at the time, you know, the whole software as a service thing. And I started off as a UI designer, got into programming, then finding that I could speak the language of both the UI and the development side, became kind of the bridge between both, so got into product strategy. And then from there, the next hard question was like, okay, well, if I know how to bring the user interface side and the tech side together, like what is the right thing to build? And that led to questions about strategy and demand and everything like that. That's actually how we got together, was me trying to learn about that stuff from what Chris and Bob were doing, and eventually spent some time as head of strategy there. And then I've been working independently, helping teams with some of the stuff actually that we're going to be talking about today over the last couple of years. And I also wrote this book, ShapeUp, in 2019, and we'll be getting into that here in a little bit.
So just to lay some groundwork, This is not a sales pitch. I know I'll get in trouble. Autobooks, just as a little foundation, we are a lightweight accounting package for small businesses, as well as basically a cash flow management tool. So send an invoice, accept credit card payments, accept ACH payments, and really handle all the cash flow issues that small businesses run into in terms of getting paid and keeping track of money, right? So on the screen, you can see our invoice creator and the payment experience for a customer. The unique thing about Autobooks is we go to market through partnerships with financial institutions. So small businesses use our software by logging into internet banking and sending invoices and doing those sorts of things. So great value for the small business and also sort of a wonderful anchor for financial institutions, big and small, to build a small business strategy around. I've been at Autobooks for 4 years. To kind of go back to the beginning, when I first got there, everyone's kind of experienced the taking a new job thing, right? Equal parts thrilling and terrifying. So I showed up, had all the imposter syndrome stuff and everything, but basically went to work applying jobs to be done right away. So I got the product team together, let's go talk to some customers, let's figure out why they're buying, why they're not buying, what they're looking for, all that sort of thing. And it's a good thing, you know, like when you're good at what you do, you find low-hanging fruit, right? So right off the bat, a couple months in, I got my feet on the ground. We had done a lot of interviews. We had talked to customers, and we came up with some ideas like, okay, we got to go just ship these things right now. Like there's just clear demand for some things that we're missing, and we got to go get it done. Had not dabbled into the engineering side that much at this point, so basically worked with my team to write up, the specifications of what we were looking for. Handed it over to the engineering team. They went to work. A couple weeks went by, features shipped. Everything was great. And I was kind of in the position where like I'm looking at what they built and I was like, it's like good. Like if I squint my eyes, I can see we've like addressed the demand and like it's fine. It wasn't exactly what all of us had in mind on the product side, but like people are using it and we're making money and like there's not a whole lot to complain about. But when I got into the details of what was going on, essentially the engineering team, which again was like productive and getting things out the door, was using what I call the paper shredder. So I asked them, like, can you explain to me, we wrote the concept up and like we were involved, but like how did you actually like get this from a concept into reality? And they said, well, we take what you write and we break every sentence up, not literally, but almost literally, like every sentence up into a card, and we divvy those cards out across a bunch of engineers, and all those engineers build the cards, and then hopefully what spits out the other end like kind of comes back together into what we had in mind, right? So we coined this term the paper shredder of like, as much as we try to stay involved and keep it all together, a lot of times there's really not somebody making sure that all the things like sort of connect, the puzzle pieces connect to come out the other side.
The intent can get lost along the way. The meaning, kind of the spirit of what was supposed to get accomplished gets lost because everyone is just focused on one little piece that they're putting together.
Absolutely. So we did a couple projects, again, like having success, but at the time I realized that I had worked with Basecamp previously, and the interesting thing about it was when you have insights that are based around jobs to be done, you've got a product team that's very confident in the insight that they have and the demand that they found and the shape that they want the product to look like. And I realized that we had worked together and that Basecamp had come up with basically a methodology for taking that kind of input, which is often different than different types of product input, and putting that into an engineering method that really like creates great output. So basically, I called Ryan. I said, hey, I think there's an opportunity to like upgrade a little bit here. Like, come in and can you tell us what you know and share the method? And that work happened a couple years ago and manifest as the book that some of you might have read called ShapeUp. Is anybody familiar with the ShapeUp concept out there? Yeah, cool. Awesome. Okay. Oh, I jumped the gun.
2 clickers, it's dangerous. Yeah. And so this was actually ShapeUp kind of was my formalization of everything that we had figured out doing product development at Basecamp. But it was really important to make it not only something that was just about Basecamp, but that it worked at other teams. So actually, Chris and I did some early prototyping at Autobooks to see, can we actually get these methods to work in other contexts? And even some of the case studies in the beginning of the book are actually Autobooks projects. Yeah. So we started together like that. And I'll give you a couple of the key ideas of what we were doing in ShapeUp, because then this is going to lead into actually how it got harder and then how we had to do some more innovation to to bring product and engineering closer. So a couple of the key ideas here: if we're not doing the paper shredder, then what are we doing, and what are we doing differently? So key thing here, first of all, totally different attitude toward estimating work. Instead of starting with a piece of work where like, this is the technical solution, this is what we're going to go build, and then attaching a number to that, which always turns out to be wrong. Instead, we work with the principle of an appetite. So instead of saying, how long does this work take to build, the question is, as a business, strategically, how much time do we want to actually spend on this particular thing? What is going on in our environment? What's the window of time? What's the urgency? How long do we actually have to come up with something and get this thing done and get it shipped, right? And then if we think of it in terms of an appetite of how much time we want to spend, then that leads into a totally different relationship to scope. Instead of having a fixed scope, which was the thing that we put the estimate on, and then in effect variable time, which is like how long it actually turns out to take, right? As long as it takes, you know? We flip that around and we have a fixed time and then a variable scope, right? So the fixed time is the amount that we want to spend strategically, and then the variable scope, from the big picture of what we shape all the way down to implementation decisions, how do we actually get creative on a technical side to find a way to get that thing done within the amount of time that we want to spend. And then this comes back to kind of where we started with getting out of this like ticket land, getting out of the paper shredder. If we assign individual tickets to people, then we are hoping that we got the recipe right, and at the 11th hour, every little piece is going to magically fit together, and that magical integration moment never comes, right? Like, we cannot foresee and predict all of the different pieces that need to get built. There needs to be a constant learning as we actually get our hands dirty. So instead of assigning tickets in a ShapeUp model, we're actually assigning responsibility for the whole. So here's the project, here's the concept that we shaped, here's the outcome that we're trying to get, and then we do the work together to kind of whittle that down to something that's going to be achievable, and then the team can make decisions and trade-offs and adjustments as they go to actually reach that. So the place that we are trying to get to, and the place that we got to at Basecamp, it's kind of the reason that I ended up writing the book actually, was this environment where there were focused and autonomous teams. Teams that knew what they were trying to achieve, they had the clarity of what they were supposed to do, and they weren't getting interrupted with a bunch of other work and a bunch of other things, and they were actually left alone to succeed at that. So this is actually something that went into Autobooks and kind of became, I think, the status quo back in, what was it, like 2020?
Yeah. Yeah. So we did it. This is us. I guess I'm on the sort of whiteboard there, and these are like my product managers. We're doing the thing. We're talking to customers. We're uncovering the jobs. We're finding demand. We're coming up with concepts, packaging them up, putting them on the conveyor belt. It's obviously not that sort of dramatic as a handoff, but we're working with the engineering team.
It feels like that there's just this flow,
There's
right?
a rhythm. There's like kind of a drumbeat to it. Engineers are taking the concepts, building them, everyone's singing along, like we're just having a great time. So version 1 of ShapeUp, the book, can help you, right? Like if you're in this sort of situation, reach for the book, train the product managers on how to write good prose. You probably got to reach for jobs to be done a little bit too. We'll touch on that. But get good at this, and those things that Ryan just touched on about appetites over estimates and things like that will get you out of this situation. The hard part is that the business grew. We were shipping features. People were buying what we were selling. We had more adoption. Things were growing. And what happened was the complexity grew to a new level, right? So the engineers are starting to talk to us about, look, we have a lot more integrations. We have a lot more features to maintain. We've got security, that we're always trying to maintain. And things are sort of piling up and coming from lots of different directions. And the safety net that the engineers actually reached for was back to Scrum, right? Because there are positive sides of that. Like, we've got a backlog and we can track everything, and it's really easy to prioritize. So they sort of reached for safety there, and you could start to feel the friction building on the product development team, right? Like, we got a little bit less time to spend with these guys. We're not shipping quite as fast. Like, what the heck is going on here? And this basically takes two forms, right? You've got frustration coming out of product, saying like, I can't get done what I used to get done. And then you've also got people looking at what the engineering team is always working on and the backlog saying, I can't figure out what this all adds up to, right? I see that we're burning down tasks and I see that we're maintaining things and things like that, but we've still got to grow this business. And I'm not sure, what's going to come out the other end of this. So this lasts weeks, and it turns into months, and you're still kind of shipping, but not at the rate that you used to. And then, no shit, the whole thing breaks. We got to a point, actually, where like you see the conveyor belt is closed. And the way that it took shape was basically, I started hearing the stories from product management, like, man, I used to have like really great relationships with these people. Like I'd bring a concept to an engineer and I'd get like all this excitement and we'd be like working on things together. And now like all my ideas are terrible and they're like too busy for me to get on their calendar. And like there's something that is really weird going on here. And then in addition to that, the demand on the business keeps growing, right? We have these wonderful investors that continue to give us money. And they're crazy, they want their money back and then some. Like there's no slowing down here, right? Like we need to absolutely keep going. And anyone who's not on a leadership team at a startup or has never been in a situation like this looks at this and is like, growing pains. Like you guys are going through growing pains. And anyone who has been in this situation knows that it's very real. Like growing pains is, I've been trusted by the board and the investors and the founder to run this thing, and have I just driven it into a wall, right? Growing pains is, am I the right person to do this job? Am I good at my craft? This is like a very real sort of struggle that we can get into if these groups aren't working together. Struggle that I personally got into, I guess I should say. And then one more thing happened, which was really, really interesting. The product people never stopped, right? And the engineering people never stopped. Like everyone was still working while I was trying to sort of step back from this problem and figure it out. And my product managers came to me and they were basically like, Chris, we've uncovered this opportunity related to onboarding. We think we found a couple steps that we can take that will 10x enrollment, which is, I mean, you guys are growing. This is like an unheard of opportunity, right? At Autobooks, when a small business signs up for as a user, right? They're inside internet banking and they click, I want to send an invoice. We do basically automated underwriting. We pull all the data from the core about the user so we can underwrite them and get them enabled for credit card processing and merchant services. And we do it basically in like a completely frictionless process for the user. There's no like long application, which is really great. But it's a highly complex process, right? We're talking to external systems to pull background checks and pulling in data from all over the place. So as much as we had our eye on, I think the product managers had spotted something, like we need to get this done, there's just a ton of complexity that we need to get through. So again, like we're getting crunched. We've got the opportunity in front of us. The engineers are sort of like on fire or doing what they need to do to keep the business running, doing their jobs. And essentially what I ended up doing was just basically circling back to this same realization. We need to go back and innovate the way we work again. We had gotten rid of the paper shredder. We had adopted this new way. We got a year through of this great conveyor belt, and we were like jamming away. Now the business had taken a new form on. We've got new challenges, and we've got to go back and basically rethink all of this stuff. So basically, I called Ryan. You got to lean on your network all the time, right? Ryan's doing his digital nomad thing. He's somewhere in Asia. Like, can you just get on a plane? I am really stuck. Like, fly over here. Help me think through this whole thing and figure out how to unstick this situation, because we're really like, Steve, our founder's in the back. He likes to say, we're on the precipice of greatness. We're like ready to go to the next level. I got to get this thing unstuck. So Ryan came in, started talking to us, and basically did some like lightweight retros, right? What's going on? What are the conversations like? What are the projects like? And the thing that we basically uncovered was that the conveyor belt works in the context where the engineers and the engineering team have the time to take a tightly packed idea from product and unpack it themselves, right? So we've got something that we've uncovered and we've got a loose boundary around it and we're pretty sure we want to ship this, so like go figure it out. They go into the code and they figure out everything that has to happen and all the uncertainty and all the risk associated with it, and they're doing that job. The problem is, and now you can see the illustration, the product managers were doing the same thing, but the engineers are looking at it in a totally different light. saying, I don't have time to go in and have these conversations and unpack all of this stuff. I've got things that I need to maintain now. So like my life has changed. So we realized that our input needed to change. Go from the light bulb with sort of the cloud around it, hey, let's like work together to figure this out, to, hey guys, like we've sort of uncovered a lot of the details of this. We've done the rigorous work of making it really, really well defined and changing it into an input that the engineers can work with.
Yeah, it was interesting. When we first sat down, it was like we didn't quite know how to solve the problem, you know? And the first instinct was like, well, we need to get the engineers to do something different, right? Because we're not able to get the projects through. But then when we started to do a little bit of the retros and look at what had been happening, we realized, oh, the engineers are already slammed. It's the like Chris said, it's the victim of your own success. There's so much to do. They don't have the time to think and to breathe and to take in some new stuff. So from the product side, we're going to treat the engineering as a factor that's outside of our control and become more rigorous and more concrete and really narrow down the things that we're going to ask them to do, where there's much more confidence that those things are going to be successful and that they're going to hit the way that we hope that they are, right? So how did we actually do that then? What are the things that we changed? So this kind of comes into the new iteration of doing the stuff that we first worked out in ShapeUp. And we're going to talk through 4 key points that kind of summarize the new way of working. And we're going to see kind of how it applied in this project, this particular onboarding change, and kind of how that became the new way of working at Autobooks now in the product team. So the first thing is actually this idea of the technical shaper. Before, product was coming up with the idea, you know, very often we hear product is going to come up with the what, and then there's going to be some kind of a process where other people are going to figure out the how. And what we discovered was that if there's too many question marks in the what, if the how is too far away, it's just not going to work. So the way to solve it was actually to bring someone over from the engineering side into product. And I don't just mean into product in the sense of like a build team where you've got, you know, the designer and the programmer and the business person or whatever. It's not a cross-functional team. We're talking about bringing a technical person into the product management group, into the what group, right? So it's technical from the beginning. That collaboration is not like something coming later, but it's there from the start. So this was a really big shift. And then having this person in the product management group enabled us to do the next steps here.
Yeah, and I think the one trap that we fell into, or I fell into, was most of us are technical. So I have 2 VPs of product that work for me that are both great engineers. The problem is we were playing like quasi-engineer during the whole time. We found demand, we need to build this thing, let's put it together. There's nothing that difficult about this, right?
In theory, you knew that this connected to that and it should be possible.
Yeah, so we were able to look at it like they'll figure it out, they'll get through it, no big deal. The difference that Ryan is talking about is someone who is actually willing to take the time to say, I'm going to take this, I'm going into the code base, I'm going to find all the things that could be risky to us, I'm going to validate that the things connect the way we think they connect,
yes,
that the data is structured the way we think it is, that there's no real pitfalls. It's not the quasi-engineer, it's actually the person on the team on the product side to go drain all these things.
There's a difference between, you know, how emails get sent or how invoices get processed in general when you're a kind of technical product person versus how our code does it, how our systems work, like what is possible in 2 weeks or 1 week or 5 weeks according to like the systems we actually have, right? So that's a different level of concreteness. So then when we had the technical shaper brought into the product group, we could start holding what we eventually called framing sessions. And a framing session is time together in a room. So the technical shaper and the product management folks are in a room for a very intense, you know, maybe 2 to 3 hour session, and they are not just talking. It's not a meeting. They are in the code and they're in the business data. So the idea of the framing session is we've got some kind of an opportunity, right? That if we could somehow skip this step in onboarding, there's a possibility to do this 10x conversion improvement, right? But the thing is, like, how do we actually get that down to something that we could call a project? An opportunity is not a project, right? And so it's a question of being able to identify an actual project that's going to have the value, that's going to be exciting for the business, something that's worth doing right now, that matters to the customer, but also that's going to be technically feasible, and especially technically feasible inside of the appetite. And this is a lot of, like Chris talks a lot about the dialectic. There's a kind of a push and pull happening here. We can look at kind of a case study of what happened here in this onboarding project. So product starts and says, look, we've spotted this possibility. If we can only skip this step, then we're going to have this 10x. But then the technical shaper already looks into the code and says, we've got a ton of different integrations here. We've got a ton of different partners. If we have to apply this skipping the step across all of our integrations, there's no way we're going to be able to get this done in a 6-week project. This is going to be a giant thing, and we don't have time for that, right? So then the question becomes, well, let's look at the breakdown per partner. So this is, again, like in the room, pulling up data, running queries, saying like, what is the actual breakdown of who's coming in via which integration? And can we slice off a chunk of this thing? Can we narrow down the definition of the problem? And then we can say here, like, oh, actually 80% of them are in this particular integration on this particular partner. If we just do this one partner and we actually cut all those others out of the scope, now this is something that's going to be achievable. And you can see that this is a shaping on the outcome, on the actual opportunity, on the thing that we're going after, right? It's not just saying like, we're going to skip the step, but we're actually going to exclude these partners, and we're just going to be affecting these people coming in. So this is narrowing down in a framing session. Shaping then is the next step that can follow on. You know, if it wasn't possible to frame the project down where there was an achievable opportunity, then you've got to go find something else to do, right? That's going to be the meaningful win. But if you are able to get through that framing session and there's a clear context, a clear outcome, a clear reason why this is the right time, and there seems to be a technically feasible approach, then shaping is about getting down to what does it actually mean? What are we actually going to go do? So here, that output from the framing session was, if we can skip the onboarding step for partner B, then we're going to get 10x increase in enrollments, right? That's kind of where it got narrowed down to. But now the question becomes, what does it actually mean to skip onboarding, right? This is one of those things that you sit together in a meeting and everybody's like, oh yeah, skip onboarding. So skip a step sounds perfect, let's do it, right? But like, what does that actually mean? So to answer that question, we started using a tool which we call speaking the system language. And this is a tool to force us down into more concreteness. So when we speak the system language, it goes like this. That screen that you want to skip, it might even be up we might be looking at it together on a monitor, right? This is the thing that we want to skip. If we can skip this, and you say, what is that? That screen, what is that thing actually? What is it called in the code? The code is the truth. What's it called in the code, right? So then the technical shaper pulls up the laptop, goes and looks at the code, and doesn't say, oh, that screen is called screen number 42. What happens? The technical shaper says, there's not one. There's actually a whole bunch of conditions here. There's 3 different flows, right? There's a whole bunch of complexity that we didn't even know, and we're going to have to make some decisions here, right? So that leads to some push and pull and to some technical trade-offs and decisions. And eventually we get to the clarity of, aha, so what we're talking about doing is pre-filling step 2 of the primary demographic form for this partner, you know, in this circumstance, and the data is going to come from this API. You feel how that got more concrete, how it got more crispy? If you go to an engineer and you say, we want to skip a step in onboarding, they're going to say, oh, come on, onboarding was something we built 5 years ago, and it's like, I don't even want to touch it. It's a swamp in there, right? You know, that's the kind of thing that usually happens. But if you go to the engineering team and you say, look, it's step 2, it's this screen, it's this partner, we've got the data via the API from this source, then you say, like, I can see how the hip bone is going to connect to the leg bone on that. I can see, like, yeah, that's something that we can do. That's something that we can go after. So that's the concreteness that we get out of the shaping session. And if we look at kind of what we got here, We've done the framing. We narrowed down to the opportunity to go after. We've done the shaping. We've got more concrete about the how, about what that solution is going to be. And by the way, we still haven't actually committed to the project yet. Nobody's pulled the trigger on, we are going to spend resources on this. We are going to go do this for the next 2 weeks or the next 6 weeks or whatever. We're still in that mode of like, is this real? Is this going to work? Are we going to commit that time? And here, there's one more big thing that we started to introduce, which is the notion of spiking. And the reason that we need to do spiking is because there's still a ton of unknowns hiding inside of this. So this is where the technical shaper brings their kind of eye in as a senior engineer, right? To be a technical shaper, one has to have a bit more experience and to be more in the senior position. And it's the senior person who's seen the different things in the past, right? And this is where they can say, they can take responsibility for flagging unknowns. And this is where they say, yeah, using API, yeah, we're just going to fetch the data from the API. Really? Like, does the API work the way that you think it does, right? When that data comes, is it going to be in the format that you actually expect it to be in? You know? What happens with our validation, right? The validator, is it just hooking on when people type in the client side, or is the validator going to play nice with data that gets piped in from somewhere else, right? You say, right? So now we've got some questions raised. These are the things that if we don't address them early, those blow up later inside of that time box and blow the scope, right? And so what we want to do is target those unknowns with spikes. So what is a spike then? A spike is a little chunk of work that the technical shaper assigns to a contributor, and the work isn't go build this thing. The work isn't go deploy this thing, you know, or go make a pull request for this thing. The work is get us an answer to this thing that we're not sure about that poses a risk. Yeah, it's a learning piece of work. And we have a few rules that we found to be very, very helpful with this. So like, for example, if we're saying, how does pre-filling step 2 with the partner data work with the validator, right? Is the validator going to work? What we don't want is a yes or no question, right? What we don't want is, yeah, it's going to be fine. Or no, it's going to be really hard, we can't do it, right? Because that's hand waving, that's assumptions. What we want is to take the person who's actually going to do the work, because it doesn't help if some senior CTO somewhere says, yeah, I know how to do that. That doesn't help if the person who's actually going to be on the clock doing it has different knowledge, right? So the person who's going to do the work goes and looks into it, and they don't say yes or no, because it's easy to just say yes or no, but they actually get their hands dirty, look under the hood and say, this is connected to that, and this goes here, and this is where we could snip and make a change, and yes, this is what we would do, and this is what would happen if we did it, right? So that's how we really get the certainty. So if we come out of that, we've got framing, narrowing it down, shaping, working out what to actually go do, and then spiking to address those unknowns and make sure that once the project goes to the team to go build, that it's not going to come back, right? It's not going to explode with a whole bunch of new questions, but that it's going to be able to keep moving forward. So where did this lead to?
Yeah, the one thing I just want to stress, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to have the product managers and the technical shaper in the room during doing the work live. So I call, and we've done this so many times now, we've kind of been in this mode for about 1.5 years, but I always call it like the product manager needs to be able to push and pull on the problem space, right? So you could see in that example, like, all right, there's a ton of different integrations that impact onboarding, right? How are we going to sort of thin slice this down into something that's going to make a difference? If the product manager is not there with the data, being able to sort of pull it apart to say, okay, let's just look at partner A, run the queries, redo the analysis real quick. All right, that's going to give us a 5% lift. Partner B, oh, that's going to give us a 70% lift. If they're showing up without the rigor and without the ability to sort of reach into the data that they've used to bring this idea to the table, it doesn't work. So the harmony that sort of exists in these meetings is I got the product person who's well educated, who can sort of move around in the problem space, and I've got the technical shaper who is in the code, sort of surfacing different approaches and different opportunities, and them working together. We heard the chief product officer, Zell, yesterday talk about her favorite day, right? It was a gnarly problem and a bunch of engineers in the room. This is that. Like I hate meetings as much as anybody else, but I hate it because we're always talking like about the work. We're not actually doing the work.
Yeah.
Like when we meet, laptops open, everyone's sharing on the screen, and we're going in a couple hours and we're coming out with something really, really valuable. We're not coordinating, oh, what are we going to do? When are we going to do it? Like all that's off the table.
This is the other thing, is that actually integrating is the most expensive thing you can do. You know, like getting that technical person and the person who knows the business like together to think on the same time synchronously, like that's expensive and that's hard. And if you get into this pattern where it's like, I got to go think about it, I have to go talk to them, I have to go do this, then you're never going to be able to shape something and like solve the problem and get things into motion, because you're always waiting for something to come from somewhere else, you know, and then there's some document and then it's like, right? But if we're in the room and we're really jamming together, then 2 to 3 hours, you can really make some decisions together. You can really clarify some things, make some cuts, slice some things, and then you know, we talk about what room are we in, right? Okay, framing, we've got this thing framed. Let's go into shaping. And shaping is another intense 2 to 3 hours the next day, right? 1 or 2 sessions, a 1 or 2 hour spike here and there, an afternoon with somebody to clarify something, and then boom, you've gone from really exciting problem, and you haven't lost all of that momentum, you haven't lost all that energy, you know, you haven't had the frustration coming in, but instead it's like, oh wow, we got closer, we got warmer, we made a decision, now we know where to go next, right? That's the kind of feeling that comes out of this.
So we've been at this for a while. We've adopted this new way of working at Autobooks. The first project that we did was a success. So this is obviously months ago. We went from about 30 small business signups a day to 300 by shipping one slice of one project, right? We haven't even rolled it out to all the other partners, but just that amplification and signups was a success. This is what, you know, in addition to creating value for the customer, everybody wants. The product team seeing cheers at the all hands meeting, right? We solved this gnarly problem. We were able to grow the business and move on down the road. And then the coolest thing that happened for me was I had an engineer that was part of the team that shipped it, had joined the company probably 3 months before, and called me right after the all hands and said, I've never had this happen in my career. I joined the company, you guys had me on a gnarly problem on day one. I understood the business value. I was able to sort of like, you know, quickly understand where to go in the code, how to figure this out, and then actually get praise like from the whole company in a, you know, the matter of a couple weeks, which is on the product side, we're always wanting to be, you know, good partners. So having that kind of feedback.
This is the best feeling when you have when you've improved the product and engineering relationship. What you get is, because you get the whole project coming in at the beginning with all of the intent and the meaning of why we're doing this, and then that because it stays whole, and because it got shaped in such a way that it's going to make it through all the different workflow stages, when it's done and it ships, all of that meaning is still there, right? Everybody who worked on it knows why they did it and how it works. And then when they see like the numbers, they see the result, everybody's like, wow, this is amazing, right? We saw the whole, you know, we saw that whole thing happen, and like that is, it feels like a win. It really feels like, wow, we do something here together. This is cool.
So this is basically the new structure. So we have a technical shaper and product manager that will go along the entire journey. We've got subject matter experts and people that are actually building in the shaping and spiking sessions. As Ryan alluded to, no yes or no question, yes or no answers on the spikes, right? We want to see proof of work. You actually know how this thing works. But moving through framing, shaping, and spiking is kind of the new way. There's kind of 3 situations. You probably picked up on it as we went through the talk, but I'm hoping that we introduce you to some new tools, and I'm hoping that if you're in these situations, right, you can sense the paper shredder situation. We're putting it in, it's kind of getting chopped up. When it comes out the other end, it's not quite what we expected, right? When you hear that, reach for the book, reach for sort of ShapeUp V1. If you get into the situation as a head of product or product manager, like, why is this thing backlogged? Why is it starting to feel like it's gumming up and like our pace is slowing down? The business is growing, everything's great, but like as a unit here, as a function, we're slowing down. Reach for this. And then God forbid, if you get into the pileup situation, things are just totally off the rails, obviously, hopefully you've got something to study up on here and implement.
The other thing this exposes, by the way, this story about the pileup with engineering, sometimes we hear this thing where the product is giving the idea of what to go do to the engineers, and the engineers are pushing back on the idea, right? it doesn't mean that the problem is in the idea. It might just mean that the pile is too big, that the overwork is too big, that there's too many other things going on, and there's just no room to get into the idea with the unknowns that are in it. So the idea is getting rejected, but it doesn't mean that there's actually a disagreement about the meaning behind the project. It could be a lot of other factors.
You can't ignore human nature, right? These self-defense mechanisms are real. We've all done this in the past, and it's just like people taking care of themselves.
And in terms of the arc of the business, we also see people kind of getting interested in this stuff in one of two cases. One is where the business is growing, it's time to scale, and then someone is thinking to themselves, maybe very often in a product role, I can't be in the middle of everything all the time, right? I can't be there like answering questions as all those little integration things are coming up in the middle of a work cycle. So how do I create a situation where we can set up some work to go do, we can shape something, and then we can entrust it to a team, and it's going to come out a few weeks later as we hoped and as we intended, and I'm going to be able to attend to other things, right? And have teams working in parallel like that. That's something that you need when you start to scale. And then on the other side, if you start to slow down, if you start to feel like we're not making the progress fast enough on the things that are important, it's more a question of how are we going to focus our energy and actually shape something that's going to, you know, be significant and get us moving somewhere, right? So those are two different cases that you might start to see where you could reach for these things.
So if you want to dig into jobs, we kind of lightly referenced it. We lost Clay 2 years ago. Before he died, he wrote a fantastic book called Competing Against Luck, which goes really into some cool case studies about how to apply jobs to be done. It's a great jumping off point if you're not already kind of indoctrinated into that way of thinking. And
yeah, and then to get into ShapeUp, of course there's the book, but I also just made a new video, which is a 20-minute intro, so you can get all the key ideas and kind of get clearer about, is this something that I want to learn more about or not? And you can find that at feltpresence.com.
And then we're doing this nifty QR code thing. If you want to connect, if you want to talk, my hope is that, one, you're not struggling with any of this. If you've got harmonious product and engineering and it's just going great, then God bless it. You don't have to worry about any of it. But my second hope is that if you run into this, when you run into this, you've got something to reach for. Either read or LinkedIn, message, call. You've heard it over and over again from the various speakers. I think the people in this room have the opportunity and ability to change the world, and I will do whatever I can to help you. So reach out and connect, and if it means jumping on a Zoom and talking through what's going on, happy to do it. Don't mean to speak for you.
From my side, it's the same. You can connect on LinkedIn here, and for me, it's really fun to find cases that haven't been solved yet. You know what I mean? If there's a new case where someone says, okay, I don't think it's going to work for me, then I say, ha ha ha, let's talk and see what's possible here. That's very interesting. And
we'll be here all day, all night. We'll be around. So LinkedIn, message us, find us. If you want to talk, happy to chat. Thank you guys. You're awesome.
All right, thanks a lot.